Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are talking about offensive wireless. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go through some attacks, some defenses, and what you can do to better secure your networks. All right, so the agenda for today, we're going to talk about Wi-Fi hacking objectives, what you are looking for as a Wi-Fi tester. After that, we'll jump into hardware and software, talk a bit about antennas, go over some Wi-Fi and protocols, and then do some looking at the airspace with Kismet. If after all of that, you're still here with us, we will talk about some attacks, including authentication and deauthentication, and some more fun stuff. And then if there is time, we will go into post-exploitation and some WPA enterprise stuff. All right. So why are we talking about wireless? Wireless presents some interesting challenges to organizations. It opens up vulnerabilities. If your wireless network is connected to your main internal network, it could provide another vector for attackers to look around. Understanding wireless makes us all more well-rounded hackers. It's another attack vector, and understanding not only how to attack wireless, but how the wireless network works in conjunction with any other internal networks, what data is going over it, etc., and just make us better pen testers overall. And while there are many online resources that demonstrate tools, we've found that there's not so many that go through the background necessary to really fully understand and appreciate some of the wireless exploitation tactics. So we hope to fill that gap. All right, so who are we? My name's Cameron. I'm a full-time pen tester. I've been with Black Hills for about 2 years. I'm a part-time martial artist. I will be happy to talk to you about fitness, gardening, and your favorite conspiracy theory. You can find me on Discord at the username listed.
Hey, my name's Ayub. I've been doing offensive learning for the last 3 years, and I consider myself a lifelong student. And my handle is White Cyberdog, so you guys can find me on Twitter and Discord under that handle.
All right, wireless testing goals. So at Black Hills, we approach wireless from the pen testing perspective. So that's what we'll be doing primarily in this webcast. So what we're looking for is to do some passive traffic analysis, explore any open networks or networks that provide captive portals, and look for any information disclosure or other things that are interesting from an attacker perspective. Next, and perhaps most importantly, we want to gain initial access of some sort to the network, whether that be through the guest network and pivoting, or capturing a pre-shared key, or some other how getting onto the corporate network. Once we are on the network, there's lots of fun things you can do. You can attempt to monitor all traffic, discover sensitive information, see if you can pivot between networks, check for segmentation, and that sort of thing. And then beyond that, you might be able to leverage wireless to get to other areas of the network.
So the first step in any engagement is reconnaissance. And one of the best tools to do that is Wiggle. So what Wiggle is basically a collection of the war driving activity of the volunteers there. So they drive around with wireless gears, they pick up all the SSIDs, they have GPS, the GPS like locates these throughout the world. Not only do they get the network names, but they also have what is equivalent to a MAC address on wireless networks, which is called the BSSID. Throughout this presentation, we will be showing you the wireless networks that are near us, but it's important to keep in mind that these effectively dox you. So if you're someone doing a presentation at your home and you don't want people to know where you live, you definitely don't want to be showing this information to other people. Another tip for using Wiggle is you probably want to create a couple accounts. Whenever I search for around, I tend to quickly run into rate limiting issues. So having a couple accounts to cycle through has helped with that. So the first thing to do when doing an engagement is to gain some situational awareness. And there are some great tools that we're going to cover that do that, but I just wanted to point out for a moment that the built-in hardware in your Mac machine can do some of this for you. So what you see there is the wireless diagnostic tool in scan mode. So it shows all the nearby networks. It gives you details on what frequencies they're on, how many they are. It gives you advice on like which channels are best. We're going to talk about channels later. It tells you whether these what protocols these devices use and the signal strength. Notice there that there are a couple that are blank. These are so-called hidden networks. And while I was researching this project, I saw some of the advice online saying that you should hide your network name, and that will somehow prevent attackers from finding you or finding your network and attacking you. But because of the nature of Wi-Fi and how it works as a broadcast in the airwaves, of course, people can still see it. It just makes it, kind of inconvenient to connect to. So that's kind of one of those snake oil security tips that are out there. The only benefit to hiding a network is like just preventing confusion from people, like maybe your family, like, hey, this is another network for me, for like my segmented network, and I don't want them to accidentally connect to this one instead or wonder why it's not working. So that's the only practical use for a hidden network there. But something else I discovered, and this was actually during one of our team meetings, is that the wireless diagnostic tool can actually sniff packets and give you packet captures nearby. You don't need any specialized hardware at all to do this. You could just pick the channel, and we'll talk about channels later, and you can start collecting them straight from your host. Another tool we like to use in a lot of our engagement is NetSpot. So NetSpot is a commercial tool, but there is a free version. And what it lets you do is make these heat maps that look pretty neat about like that shows visually the representation of your network. So one of the biggest reasons that this could be useful to someone is if you can see where your network goes and how far, let's say,
How far the signal strength bleeds.
yes, how far the signal strength leads through the walls and stuff. You can tell maybe, hey, I don't need 10 access points over here, maybe because no one's using these and it's leaking to my neighbors, and that might open me up to an attacker in the parking lot, for instance.
One of the more confusing topics to wireless hackers is some of the background on what exactly wireless signals are, what are channels, what does decibel per milliwatt mean, and that sort of things. I know it's confusing to me starting out, and while it's not necessarily necessary to run some of the attacks we're going to talk about, it is helpful for understanding what's going on in the background. So typically when we talk about Wi-Fi, we're talking about 802.11x or AX, etc., which operates in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrums. With Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7, we're going beyond that, but for the purposes of explanation, the 2.4 and 5 spectrums are more worth talking about. What you see on screen is the breakdown of the 2.4 gigahertz band, and that band is further divided into different channels. And each of those channels is the center of a frequency at which connections can be made. So if you have several different access points broadcasting different SSIDs, you want them to not interfere with each other. So you could have one on channel 1, one on channel 2, one on channel 3, etc. And these do overlap a little bit as the signal flows out, as you can see in the diagram. But what you're looking at is the center frequency. So the 2.4 gigahertz band, for example, is divided into 11 subchannels in the US. If you were here on the pre-show banter, you saw Tim talking about how other countries had more. So on the where we are, for example, you can use all the way up to the 13th channel as well. Knowing the channel is important for locking on your adapter to a specific access point and targeting your attacks, but we'll talk more about that when we get to our airspace analysis later.
So this slide is basically a general overview of like the Wi-Fi names and the standards that are associated with and the frequencies they operate with. I just wanted to shout out the Wi-Fi Alliance real quick. In a world where people keep making more and more confusing names, the Wi-Fi Alliance has bucked that trend and went from names like 802.11n to stuff like that's easier to explain and measure, like Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6. So I really appreciate that, and I think more companies should follow that nonprofit's example. There's also several security protocols that are associated with wireless, and obviously the first is just having an open network. Anyone connect. There's effectively no security there. It's in red because it's not recommended, obviously. And the next step up, the first attempt to create some sort of authentication with wireless was the wired equivalent privacy, or WEP. So essentially, the problem with WEP is that it reused keys, which would eventually allow someone sniffing network traffic to be able to decode, recover that pre-shared key. Another way to authenticate is Wi-Fi protected setups. So this is a convenience feature that turns out to be a giant security hole. We have a demonstration for this attack coming up, and we'll go into more detail about it then. And then there's the WPA, Wi-Fi protected access. And you should be more familiar with these. These are the ones you kind of see around. So the most common is WPA2, from my experience, floating around. And that is, decently strength protocol that takes advantage of some handshakes to create a more secure connection that existed than WPA. Additionally, there is a distinction starting with WPA2 between a personal and enterprise connection. And what the enterprise connection does is, instead of just using a pre-shared key like the personal ones, like the same password for everyone, it allows you to authenticate using a Raidus server that's often connected to Active Directory. So you can have a simple way to log in that way. And finally, there's WPA3. We'll go into more detail there, but it is the latest and greatest, and it is what I would recommend if you were having to pick one of these security protocols.
And you have hardware that supports it.
And you have that supports.
All right. Sorry for dying. So if you're interested in doing wireless analysis, wireless testing, or exploitation, probably the most important piece of hardware you're going to have is the adapter and antenna that you are working with. What did we do with that other one? Is it still around? Oh, it's behind you. So there's two primary types of antennas that you'll want to consider. Those are directional antennas and omnidirectional antennas. So omnidirectional antennas transmit signal in 360 degrees. That's actually kind of a lie. It's because of how the signal propagates. It's more of like a figure 8 shape. But practically speaking, the signal goes out in all directions. This is ideal if either the client or the access point is in motion, because you're not likely to lose connection as you move from place to place. However, this does make it more susceptible to interference from any direction. And it takes more power to produce the same amount of signal, because whereas a directional antenna would target all of that signal in one specific direction, it takes more power to do that in every direction. This is an alpha adapter here. Someone can hopefully post a link in the Discord too. It'll cost you about $70 on Amazon and get the job done in most cases. For directional antennas, they produce a narrow beam, which minimizes opportunity for interference. However, the consequences of that interference could be a lot worse, since the signal is only in one very specific area. This also arguably makes the signal hard. If you're using a directional antenna to transmit, it makes it harder to eavesdrop, as you can't eavesdrop from just anywhere. You have to be essentially in line with the signal. These types of antennas, the high-powered ones, are typically used for satellite communication, microwave links, etc. Good for precise communications. In addition, there are also semi-directional antennas that try to give you the best of both worlds, but there's some drawbacks to those as well. So practically speaking, for most things you're going to do, a good omnidirectional antenna, or ideally 2 to 3, will be able to perform most of your attacks and your reconnaissance activity. Now, a panel antenna or some other higher power directional antenna can be very useful in certain circumstances. For example, I was on a test a while ago where we had a client who was on a very high floor of a very big building. And from our hotel across the street, we were able to get up on the roof and get pretty much line of sight to the floors that our client occupied. However, we had not brought a strong enough directional antenna. If we had something like a panel antenna that had a higher transmit power, we might have been able to get their Wi-Fi from across the street. That would not work with a small omnidirectional antenna such as this one. I have coworkers who have brought super high power directional antennas on engagement and been very successful with them. However, if you have a very large antenna mounted on your car pointed at a big building, it turns out people might call the authorities on you. All right, so once we have our adapter, we plug it in, we install all the drivers. That could be a whole webcast on its own, and we are constantly having issues with them. So if you have issues installing adapters, no, you are not alone. The problem will not go away. It will only change over time and cause you a roller coaster of emotions throughout the rest of your wireless testing journey. Once you have that installed and running, you're probably going to need to put it in monitor mode. The way you do that is with the commands listed below. To check what mode your adapter is in, you can run iwconfig, and it will show you the mode in the highlighted portion below. That's it for this. All right, next we're going to talk about running Kismet. Go one more slide. All right, so we've done lots of talking. Now we're going to switch over to our Kali Linux machine and do some demonstrating. All right, are we able to see the Kali Linux VM? I will assume silence means we are. All right, so we just ran Kismet with the command listed in one of our slides. The adapter is monitoring essentially the entire airspace as far as it can see around us. By default, you'll be on the device tabs. A common thing that happens while trying to load this tool is the interface will load, but you won't see any data in it. In that case, you can specify the adapter in the Kismet command as is in the slides. And if you still don't see it, you'll click on this hamburger menu, and then in the data sources tab, you can see all of your available interfaces for the wireless capture. So in this case, we see the interface. It can tell us the hardware, whether or not it's running. And earlier we talked about channels. So Kismet, the Aircrack suite, and most airspace monitoring tools that you use will give you the impression that they are looking at the entire spectrum at all points of time. And this is a lie. You can only observe one channel at a time. So to get a better view of what's going on around you, what these tools do is they just hop between channels. So that's what this line right here means, is the Kismet is telling the adapter to change channels at a rate of 5 channels per second. When we want to do attacks, we will change this to lock mode and pick the channel that we're interested in observing. The drawback to hopping between channels is while it gives us a better overall view of what's going on, it will be less likely to pick up complete communication, such as a 4-way handshake. All right, so what else are we seeing here? We have the name of the device. This is typically going to be the BSSID. It tells us whether it's a client or access point, the encryption. So we see we have a lot of PSK networks here. And then we have the channel, number of packets, any connected clients, and the BSSID in the case where the device name is showing the SSID. So the signal strength is interesting. Signal strength is measured in decibels per milliwatt or dBm, and they're all in the negative. The closer you get to 0, the stronger the signal strength is. So -20 to -60 is going to be a pretty solid signal. Anything under that, like we have this where the signal strength is -85, that's going to be barely visible to most devices. -18, whatever this 58 Wi-Fi is, that means it's probably like right next to us somewhere. The reason that signal strength is interesting to look at is because if there is a device that we're trying to find, by moving closer to that device, the signal strength will change as we capture more packets. On the flip side, if you see something suspicious looking and you're wondering, is it a mobile device? Is it a laptop? Is it a TV? Is it a drone? You can watch the signal strength I can't speak today. Watch the signal strength change and determine if it's in motion, if it keeps coming back and forth, or essentially what it's doing. The channel tells you the center frequency at which that device is operating, which is essential for locking onto that channel and performing deauthentication attacks, full packet capture, etc. The packets graph is a little less useful. It does show us that there is data flowing on these, whereas the ones below, there's not a lot going on. We can search, we can filter, we can look at the different SSIDs, etc. The alerts tab in Kismet can be interesting. It will try to detect things such as when a deauthentication attack is occurring, but that's a little bit too much for today because we're running behind. All right, what's next on our slides? All right, back to the slides. Where are the slides? This is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we've talked about the airspace. Now we're gonna do something fun. We're gonna look for, what are we looking for?
Rogue access point.
A rogue access point. What is that?
Rogue access point is a device that is unauthorized on your network that is impersonating legitimate devices.
Mm-hmm. All right, why would someone want to do that?
They can use it to capture credentials
Hmm,
or sniff traffic.
interesting. So we're going to look for a rogue access point, and what that is a device that is masquerading as a legitimate access point for some reason or another. So in the past, what we found on tests is a target had a restricted network environment. So some employees had the password, some didn't. And the tester that was on this engagement found that one of the, well, I guess I can't say, it'll spoil it. They tracked down a rogue access point and found it in a closet, and apparently was being used by one of the maintenance crews to get internet. And since outside wireless was not allowed, they had given it the same name as the internal network, such that no one would find it. But it was found, and we're going to talk about how. All right, switching back to Callie. Where's the Callie? There's the Callie. All right, looks like we're screen sharing unless anyone says otherwise. All right, so in the time we've been sitting here, we've seen 61 different network devices, which is interesting. So how do we determine what a illegitimate access point is? First, let's figure out what our target network is. We pretend we are at an organization's building. We want to know what their corporate Wi-Fi is. Most likely it'll be obvious. It'll say in the SSID like Evil Corp 01 or something similar. Now, if we want to figure out another way we can do that is look at the number of clients. There's 5 networks in the area, and when we see 10 employees in the building, we want to look for the one with the most connected devices. What is this one? What is this?
I'm not sure.
Well, this seemingly strange BSS ID right here that apparently has 10 connected clients. We haven't seen that before, so we're going to pretend it's not there. The next item on this list is the 58 Wi-Fi network with 6 connected clients, and we see there's lots of packets going through. So it may be safe to assume that this is our target's network. If we click on that device, we can see the MAC address, which is the same as the BSS ID. And then lots of other good information. Where's the, all right. So we can also assume that this A4 MAC is legitimate because there's lots of clients connected to it. Now, that's not necessarily the case. It is an assumption that might not always hold true. All right, so let's go to our SSID tab. We can search for 58 because we've determined we believe that to be the network name. And then in the SSID tab, if we click on that, we have a list of advertising access points. Why are there more than 3?
I'm not sure. Turning it on and turning it off.
Oh, you keep turning it on and turning it off, and it randomizes the MAC every time.
Yes.
We should not have done that.
Interesting.
All right, so we see lots of advertising APs. Typically, if you're in a in some kind of corporate infrastructure, all of their wireless gear is going to come from the same vendor. And because the gear comes from the same vendor, the MAC addresses are all going to be similar. So we can pretend, for example, that the 3 first hex pairs are the same in every case. If we have 5 that are the same and 1 with a MAC address that is not the same, that tells us that the one with the different MAC is suspicious and worth looking into. Another way you can tell the access point is suspicious is in this list, we can see the encryption types that are the encryption that is offered. So for example, if we have 6 access points offering WPA2 and 1 just offering WPA or WPA3 or being an open network, that should be a red flag as well. In this case, it looks like our attacker has done their due diligence and is offering the same encryption protocol as the primary access point. So, view device details. Let's go back to our devices and search for 58 Wi-Fi. Right. If we know this one is legitimate, we see the MAC address starts with A4, we see ASCII Computer Corp. Let's assume that that is the legitimate vendor. Then if we look at the other broadcasting IPs, we see that this appears to be an Apple product. So if we pretend that there was only one Apple product, that looks suspicious. So what would we do for further finding the rogue access point is we would take our monitoring device, the laptop with Kismet running or some other thing, and we would start walking the premises until that signal strength gets closer to 0. And that would tell us essentially all we need to know. Okay, we have questions. Is this picking up networks that are hidden and have not been broadcasted? The answer is maybe. If there is an access point not broadcasting where the ID is hidden and there's nothing else in the near vicinity, we will not we might see the device, but we will not be able to discover that SSID. However, as soon as a client device, such as someone's cell phone, gets within range of your monitoring device and makes a broadcast request looking for it, which your phone is doing all the time, looking for different networks that it's connected to before, then you will see that request, and a monitoring tool such as Kismet will be able to connect the dots and will essentially uncloak that SSID. Are there any known weaknesses saying it's WPA3?
Save the questions till the end.
Yeah. How do you handle things like radius? We're going to talk about WPA3 and some enterprise stuff closer to the end of this talk. So since we have a very fragile setup and our entire connection to you all relies on this Ethernet cable, we are not able to go find that rogue access point at this time. So we will head back to the slides. So who was that access point? That access point was a cell phone. And the reason that there were so many of them that were rogue access points instead of just one was because Apple does a MAC address randomization thing, because the access point was turned on and off again and again. Kismet saw all of those and they stay in the packet capture. So even though they're not continuously broadcasting, you will see old records in that interface, which is good to know. Even if you haven't seen a device for an hour, there will still be an entry for it.
Mhm.
What's next? Skip. All right, if you're still here, we have some attacks to talk about.
Yeah, we'll be covering a bunch of attacks. First, a basic handshake capture. We're going to show you what a DAuth attack looks like. PMK ID attacks. We'll talk about those. We're going to show you some WPS, Wi-Fi protected setup, brute forcing attacks. And then finally, we'll do some WPA2 cracking, like the kind of classic wireless attacks that you see all over the place.
All right, next.
All right, so what is a handshake? So essentially, while your device using WPA2 and above is trying to authenticate, it does a handshake in order to establish a secure connection to transmit. And you can go into the details if you want, but essentially it's used to, establish that secure key.
Can we go back for a minute?
Yes.
So one thing that's interesting and kind of important is there are two nonces, numbers only used once, and there is the pre-shared key and message integrity code that goes into that. So the access point knows the legitimate PSK and the client knows the constructed PSK. So after exchanging the nonces and the PTK, the traffic key, which is generated by those values as well as the PSK, the client sends that to the server, and then the server uses that to generate one more key, the GTK, I think it stands for group transmit key. And if the password was entered wrong, those PTKs will not match and that third message will fail. So if you're capturing packets directly in something such as Wireshark and you see the first two messages in the handshake and nothing after that, and then the third one fails, then you can be fairly certain that an incorrect password was entered. We're back to Kismet again.
Back to Kismet.
All right, we're going back to the Kali box. Where's the Kali? I really need to get faster at this screen switching. Is this it? This is it. So how do we capture handshakes? Right now, we are hopping between channels. Since we know we want to capture traffic on this 58 Wi-Fi, let's go over to the device that we know to be one of the legitimate access points. That'd be this one right here. We see it's on channel 11. So then ideally the way you would Ideally, in a professional setting, you would have multiple adapters, and you can have one constantly listening, ideally something that can cover more channels in more time, and then you'd have a second adapter for very specific targeted activities. So let's go ahead and lock onto channel 11. That looks good. Now we're going to start seeing a lot less traffic because there's a lot less to look at. So if we're capturing all the traffic, we should see a handshake. And the way we will know that we have is the entry for the SSID will turn red. Only there were a device that needed to connect to Wi-Fi. And this is another reason to bring multiple adapters and be running multiple intacs in unison, is a lot of what you're doing, especially the first day or two, will be kind of sitting around waiting for interesting things to show up.
I think I logged in a couple of times.
Did you forget the network? Oh my gosh, I lied to 500 plus people. So it is not the SSID tab that changes color. It is the device tab. So we can see that a four-way handshake was captured involving this device right here. And does it indicate that anywhere? It does not. But now that we have seen that device, it's safe to say our work here is done. How do I make this bigger? There we go. So then we can exit out of Kismet. And then Kismet by default collects Kismet files. It's a specific format. You can go into the configuration, change it to log the data in PCAP format too. If you forget to do that or like to not to, you can use this Kismet DB2 PCAP tool, which takes in the file name and creates the handshakes in a PCAP format. So if we take our file, which one do I want? 16? Then if we look there, we've created our handshake.pcap file. We can go and open that in Wireshark, or do we have a command to extract the handshake?
Yes.
All right, back to the slides. Do you think it's better to use Kismet or the command line tools? From a pen tester perspective, to answer that, Kismet, it looks a lot nicer in screenshots, and it makes it easier to explain to C-levels or people that might not have that technical expertise or be used to looking at command line interfaces. It's just a little bit nicer. However, every tool does things slightly differently, so it all depends on what you need. Another thing that we really like about Kismet is it captures Bluetooth traffic, etc. if you have a Bluetooth adapter. And does all kinds of interesting stuff.
So were you looking for the PCAP command?
I'm looking for the slides right now. All right, slides are back. So we just captured a handshake. We converted the Kismet log containing the handshake to a PCAP, and then to extract the handshake from that PCAP, we will discuss when we're going over cracking with Hashcat. All right. The next thing we have are deauthentication attacks. What this essentially means is just finding a client and sending packets that look like they come from the access point, telling the client to disconnect. This could be used for a denial of service. However, lots of modern protocols are pretty robust against this now. The reason we would want to deauthenticate a client is either to capture the handshake when they're forced to reconnect, to uncloak hidden SSIDs, as we talked about earlier. If we see an SSID that's hidden, a device broadcast or not broadcasting, where we can see the SSID is hidden, but there's like 2 clients connected, we could try deauthing those clients. And then when that client then reaches out asking, hey, does hidden Wi-Fi number 5 exist, we would capture that SSID. Similar to deauthing clients to capture handshakes, there's various enterprise attacks, such as versions of the evil twin, where you are running your own access points, either in the parking lot or competing with the real access point. Deauthing clients can give you a better chance that one of those will then try to connect to you rather than the legitimate access point. You can broadcast deauthentication packets. It's fairly easy to do. We recommend using targeted attacks to avoid unintended disruptions to business operations. Do you want to skip the deauth for time purposes?
No, we just cover it real quick, right? It's not gonna take too long.
Right. Right. So how do we do a deauth attack? Well, we can demonstrate that now. Right. Oh, I can't copy from here, can I? Right.
We need to show.
Instead of live, in the interest of time, we're going to show you the pre-recorded example. So the first thing you'd want to do is this TAC A is the MAC address of the access point. So once you've chosen the client that you're going to deauth, you have to see who they're connected to, and that value, that MAC address or BSSID, is what goes in the TAC A field. Then you need to specify the network interface and the client device that you are targeting, and 4 is the number of deauth frames here.
What happens if you set that to 0?
What happens if you set that to 0? It does not send 0 frames. It sends frames infinitely, which could be quite problematic, especially if that's not the behavior you're expecting. If you send 1 deauth frame, you might be successful, you might not. There could be interference, the client might not listen. Typically, we have this value somewhere between 4 and 16, gives us pretty good results. All right. Another interesting attack is the PMKID attack. The PMKID is the unique identifier used by the access points at the access points to keep track of the PMK being used by each clients for broadcast and multicast traffic. This is common in larger environments where you have maybe 4 access points on each floor of the building, all broadcasting the same SSID. And these get cached such that if an employee is walking to the lunchroom or they're going 2 floors down to talk to their colleagues, those devices can stay seamlessly connected without having to repeat the entire authentication process each time that they connect to a new access point. And because this is cached, there are ways to, by capturing that PMK ID in transit, you do not need to capture the entire handshake. Now, in small environments, the access points might not be broadcasting it, and so you might be stuck with the old method. It just depends on the particular setup and the particular environmental conditions. Are we moving? Okay. Now, we do not have a device that's set up to cache the PMK ID, so we cannot show that one to you. But the tool used is H6 dump tool. That's the one I prefer to use. All packet capture tools are fairly similar, and you can use the one of your choice. And then once you have the packet, you can use the second command to take the cap or pcap ng file and via HCX PCAP-NG tool will extract the hash and put it in the file specified with the TAC-O flag. And from there's your typical password cracking regime.
All right, let's talk about Wi-Fi protected setups. So you guys ever try to authenticate to like Netflix on your computer or whatever? Instead of having to put in your long password on your smart TV, it'll give you a code. And that's usually more convenient. But someone had that same idea when it came to wireless. Like, why would you put in a long pre-shared key when you can just use a simple code and save yourself time? Now, unfortunately, that means your password is essentially 8 characters. So you guys can imagine 8 digits. So if you have an 8-digit password that's just numbers, it's going to be pretty easy to crack. The tool I like to use to analyze WPS is from the Reaver toolkit. So the Reaver toolkit includes both Wash and Reaver itself. So you can run Wash, and you have to specify the interface name, which is your WLAN, whatever that happens to be called. In my case, it was WLAN 0 mon, because it was in monitor mode. The TAC all option shows you all options, not just the ones that are have WPS. And I think this is a really good sanity check. Like, I'm seeing everything that should be here. And the scan option does an active scan. You can also do it passively. And then when you find something that may be vulnerable, you can use Reaver. Again, specify the interface name, the BSSID of the system you want to target, the channel number, and you can throw a couple of verbose flags. And running that command will just brute force it. Now, a lot of routers by default will prevent you from brute forcing this pin. So it depends on the router. And the image on the bottom right actually shows you the symbol of a WPS. Now, this is a misconception I had. Like, I understood WPS was enabled on systems, but I thought you had to press that little button to turn it on to start, connecting. But no, you don't. I was able to exploit this without interacting with the router at all. So here's what the wash command looks like when you run. Again, specifying the first column is the BSSID. You want to take note of that to use further attacks. Second column is the channel. Again, you want to take note of that. The fourth column, it tells you the version of Wi-Fi protected setup. Now, I don't know if this attack works on version 2. I wasn't able to test that, but it definitely works on version 1, as you guys will see. And then the lock status, that tells you if someone has locked it out, if someone's been guessing those pins and it's prevented you from connecting anymore. And the vendor, this is an ASUS router that I set up. This was actually a router I bought here in Taiwan. And instead, unfortunately, I won't be able to bring it back to the US because it does have more bands channels, as we mentioned earlier. But it doesn't show up as a ASUS as the vendor. It shows up as the chip manufacturer. There's only a handful of chip manufacturers out there. And then finally, you have the name of the router, which is the Promised Land. So here's a little video of me showing an attack. Again, as I said, the brute force attack didn't work for me, but this router that I had, by default, straight from the store, I just plugged it in. I didn't set anything to any dangerous settings, was vulnerable to an attack called pixie dust. So what pixie dust does is essentially takes advantage of bad random number generation to make it so that instead of taking a couple hours to guess the pin, it takes a few seconds, as you guys will see. So I already explained this command. We can just see how long this
You're
takes.
playing it and I can't see the play button.
Oh, sorry, buddy.
Okay. All right. And here's that live demo for you.
All right, so you can see the command goes, and it takes only a few moments to find not only the pin, but also a fairly strong pre-shared key. So having Wi-Fi protected setup enabled on your router doesn't seem to be a good idea at all. Next slide. So here's how you disable it in this home router. The funny thing is if you read it, it says Wi-Fi protected setup provides an easy and secure establishment of a wireless network. As we know, as we just saw, it does not, and you probably should turn it off. Here's another example we got going on. Next slide. We're going to show you some the classic cracking of a pre-shared key. and a WPA2 network.
So
So
to clarify, we got that handshake earlier, we got the PCAP, we extracted the handshake from the PCAP, and this is how we would crack it?
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So here's me looking at the local networks to see what was going on. I see the BSID of my target. You can see me paste stuff. All right, and here's me capturing the handshake as we showed earlier. This is just a different way of doing it. This is a deauth attack as we showed earlier. Deauthing. You can see the handshake on the top right being captured. I stop the scan there. And then I go to crack the password pretty quickly because it's a weak password, pineapple. So we showed you guys a few attacks now. And we won't just show you a bunch of attacks without giving you a solution. And the great thing is we didn't have to come up with the solution ourselves. The great people at the Wi-Fi Alliance did that for us with WPA3. So essentially, it prevents all the attacks that we showed you earlier. It uses stronger encryption, so we can't do any offline cracking like we just showed you. We can't do those PMKID attacks that Cameron discussed, and we can't do those deauth attacks either. The only con of using WPA is that it does not have the kind of widespread deployment and availability acceptance that other Wi-Fi protocols seem to have even now after it's been a few years since it's come out.
Which you just mean you need a device that supports WPA3 and not many devices do not yet.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
All right. So we're getting towards the end of our time, but one thing we just wanted to briefly mention is the attacks that you can do against WPA Enterprise. WPA Enterprise does not use a pre-shared key where the same key is used for every single client to connect to the network. There is a Radius server involved that talks to the Active Directory server and confirms that each client that connects is a valid Active Directory user. And so each person's credentials give only them access, which provides a lot more fine-grained control over who's being authenticated. However, this presents some more interesting challenges. Are the notes here for this slide or the next one? Okay, this one. So the evil twin attack, that essentially involves setting up an access point that looks like the legitimate access point. You could do this for PSK networks as well. However, capturing and cracking the hash might be easier. So say you are broadcasting the ID corporation 1 and real corporation 1 is also broadcasting the SSID corporation 1. The client has to then, the client wanting to connect to the real corporation has to decide which access point it wants to connect to. If you can convince the clients that your malicious endpoint has a better wireless connection, they might choose to connect to you. And that is done primarily through signal strength and having a higher signal to noise ratio. So if you have a better wireless connection through RSSI? Yeah. Through the RSSI algorithm, then you could potentially convince a client device, specifically the device, not the person, to connect to your network automatically without the human client necessarily needing to press any buttons or actually make that attempt to authenticate. I'm on the wrong slide. You didn't tell me I was on the wrong slide. So in lots of these cases, you'll end up getting a netNTLM v2 hash because you're getting the hash of the password, not the plain text password. And then you can attempt to crack that offline the same way you would with WPA2 PSK passwords. There's two really new attacks on the market that we're not going to talk about on today. The EAP relay is essentially a machine in the middle attack with the radius server. And then the blast radius attack we honestly know pretty little about. The proof of concept has not been released, but it's going to affect essentially all WPA3 devices out there. So there's a link to that in the references. All right, let's talk about PostX and other things to consider. MAC address bypasses are often exploitable in the wireless space. What this means is there's two cases. One is you have a PSK network where after the client authenticates using the pre-shared key, they are then asked to identify themselves via username and password or some other mechanism. The second case is when you have a Wi-Fi captive portal, like maybe in an airport or somewhere, and you have to enter some sort of credentials to get access to that. The difference being, rather than having the credentials to get on the network, you connect to the network and then need the credentials to bypass the access restrictions. Oftentimes, the deciding who a client is done via their MAC address because each machine should have a unique MAC. However, you can spoof your MAC address in software, which in either case, if you assume the MAC address of an already authenticated client, it is possible, depending on implementation, that the captive portal will allow you through thinking you are the client that you are spoofing. I think the only other thing we wanted to mention is once you are in the network, that is when the fun begins. That's when you want to start looking around for ways to pivot between networks, such as if your target offers a free guest network, it's possible you could use that to pivot onto the corporate network. You want to check for network segmentation, see that if you want to run your basic enumeration commands and see what is the access point using for DNS. Is it using Google DNS servers and you can only get out to the internet? Or is it using internal DNS? Can you Nmap scan that network and see domain controllers? The answer is you shouldn't be able to, but you never know what you're going to find.
So I just wanted to mention a quick tool right before we end. It's called Wi-Fi Forge. A bunch of people have been working on it. And it's basically, hey, I want to do wireless attacks without having to go through the pain of setting it up. So we're not going to demo it here, but the GitHub project is available. I'm pretty sure there's a workshop coming. And here's our conclusion slide. Basically, I think people should treat Wi-Fi with the importance that it deserves. It doesn't seem to get the kind of love that I think warrants the risk that it might pose to an organization. Advice, disable these weak protocols that you have, WEP, WPS, WPA, avoid using pre-shared keys if you can. And if you do use a pre-shared key, make sure it's long, unique, 15 plus characters, good password. And then also, hey, here's some tools that you can use to monitor your airspace. Make sure knowing what's normal is the first way that you're going to detect something abnormal. So that's about it. Thanks, guys.
All right, that means it's time for questions.
If we have time.
Yeah, so we're right at the 2 o'clock, so we know a lot of people need to leave. So before you go, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Cameron and Ayub, for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for being awake where you are at the time it is where you are, and for doing a live demo and for showing all the things that you've learned. The one thing I always love about teaching is that you had to learn it. So Cameron and Ayub, as you wrap up today, what's the one thing that you learned that you want to share with everybody else? Like besides the whole presentation, but if you could sum up everything today, Cameron, what would it be?
Everything I've learned a lot. I've learned that each Kali update brings a whole bunch of unknown consequences. I learned a little bit more about how the four-way handshake works in detail, and just a little bit more about WPA enterprise attacks.
Ayub, you?
I didn't get to, so that'll have to be next time.
I learned that it's really useful just to go through your router, see what those default settings are, and challenge those assumptions. Like, hey, it says it's secure, I should leave it on. Maybe not.
Yeah. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. We do this every Thursday, as long as we're not traveling or something happened. So please join us next time. And if you have not checked in for Hackett yet, you can always do that inside Discord. It is live. during the webcast in Discord. So if you meet those criteria, then go ahead and check in for a Hackett, and we'll get you. It's a manual process. And we'll stick around for just a few minutes for Q&A. But if you need to go, thank you so much. All right. Cameron, Ayub, we're in post-show banter. So we'll see if there's any questions that we can answer real quick. I know you've been busy. It's tired. You're tired where you're at. So
you guys did a good job of answering questions live too. So, but if we did not answer your question and you desperately need to answer, go ahead and pop it in the Discord and they will answer it before they go back to sleep.
This person said, should we use cert-based auth for enterprise wireless?
So my experience with that, so when I, worked in my first big corporation is, hey, I went to this office that I've never been to, and my computer was automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. It was amazing. So yeah, I think that would be recommended. What does Cameron think?
Yeah, currently certificates are a lot stronger than passwords. I'm not sure what they mean certs in contrast to, but certificate authentication is definitely going to be one of your safer options.
And it's convenient.
Yeah. Real quick question. Do you ever perform ward driving for recon?
We do and we don't. So we already know who our clients are, what their SSIDs are going to be before we get there. We typically look those up on Wiggle just so we know we're up against, what kind of authentication they're going to have and stuff. Now, that used to be incredibly useful for pre-computing dictionaries for password cracking, because the SSID goes into the hashing algorithm. And so knowing the SSIDs beforehand, you can pre-compute part of that password cracking process. Now, with modern computing power, that's not necessary so much. And I'm not sure any of us have done that in a few years. But essentially what we do on site is the same thing. We drive around, confirm what we saw, look for if there's anything we weren't expecting. And that's about it, and go from there.
This question's been asked a few times. I think the person is looking for an answer if you can.
I have one more thing, actually. Someone
yeah.
asked if we do that with phones. Typically not. We use external Wi-Fi adapters that get a little bit more power. One thing we do with phones is typically someone with an iPhone will try to get close to the building such that they can contact the network and automatically download the certificate from one of the access points, so that we have that to then set up our fake access point for like an evil twin attack or something that looks similar and has the same information in our certificate.
All right. Do you ever have recommended Wi-Fi card to use for pen testing, Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 6, that does monitoring, promiscuous mode, etc.?
So this one does Wi-Fi 7, but we couldn't get it working on an ARM-based system. I don't know if you guys can see the model number.
I can post in the Discord. It's the alpha ending in an H.
Yeah, it's alpha AWUS 036ACH.
Can you type that in Discord, actually?
Yes.
Pretty much any external adapters you get are going to be able to do monitor mode. There's not too much difference between the two of them. You might want to get some like slightly longer antennas. And then after you have a couple omnidirectional antennas, then my next recommendation would be to get some sort of directional panel antenna or something that can also transmit and receive with a bit more power.
Can I check this out now?
The last question I'm going to ask, unless... Okay.
Actually,
Did we lose them right at the end?
Did they disconnect on purpose?
Very possible.
Yeah.
Very possible. Oh no, we did lose them.
We lost their neck.
yeah, I was like,
You're back.
serious.
You're back.
Oh, we're back.
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
Hey!
I touched the wireless
all over
adapter.
again.
Tell me not to
No.
touch it. Anyways, this one is another one that we were using, and this one actually works. So I'm gonna drop the model number for this one in chat too. This is what it looked like.
All right. So the last question that I have is a bit of a speculation question. And so the question is, with cars being more connected through Wi-Fi, Will car hacking become popular in the near future?
I mean, depends on what you mean by car hacking. Like, it's always been a thing in niche communities. We've seen jamming attacks between the key and the car where you capture the signal from the key fob, capture another signal, replay the first so that the car opens, go back and grab your device later while you still have one valid code. That was fixed. There's research going on at certain national labs and stuff involving CAN bus hacking and hacking the electric chargers. In terms of Wi-Fi, I'm honestly not certain. I'm sure it's a thing. I'm sure there's people working on it and people that will keep doing it. I would like to believe that they're fairly secure against most attacks, but I don't know. It's interesting because it's a different threat model too. Like do they broadcast when the car is off? Could you use it to get into the car? And then like that is your target, whereas in like a corporate setting, Wi-Fi typically is not the target, but is an attack vector instead.
I think the day when someone has their car ransomwared will be a big day.
I think we're far off. No.
And you go like, send 2 Bitcoin to unlock your car to go to work.
You can have it. Like, I don't, you just have my car.
All right, Cameron, Ayub, anything before we run out of time?
Not really. Thanks so much, everyone, for showing up, and thanks to the crew for the support. Do you have anything?
No, but I definitely will look through all the Discord messages and Zoom messages and let you guys know, answer any questions that we didn't get to at this point. But it's kind of late for us now, so I'm definitely looking forward to go to sleep.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Well,
thank
thank you
guys.
for committing to doing this today,
Mhm.
and then thank you for continuing to commit to do this today. So we appreciate
Yeah.
it. Thank you, Cameron and Ayub. And if you ever need a pen test, like these are our testers, right? So it's not like we have 45 full-time pen testers, and they're all fantastic. And so thank you so much for
Yep.
sharing your knowledge and learning and researching and doing the best you can to secure the community. And we always believe like we want to have the hardest pen test possible. That's John's like thing. He's like, I want to have a hard pen test. Like I want it to be difficult for our pen testers. And that means that when you secure your environment, and then when we show up and you're like, ha, we gotcha, pen testers. We actually have a special reward that we give to certain clients that actually kick our butts. And so it doesn't happen often, but we do give it away. And so with that,
Yeah.
we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Ryan,
Bye.
kill it with fire, Ryan.
Kill it.
Kill it. Kill it.
Kill it.
Ryan.
Do it.